Uh, well, my dad left us when.
Hollywood loves to celebrate its legends, but behind the shimmering lights and the standing ovations lies a world far harsher, far more human, filled with ego, rivalry, and battles waged in the shadows. And no one walked through that battlefield with fiercer intensity than Gene Hackman. Hackman, one of the greatest actors to ever step in front of a camera, treated acting not as a profession, but as a sacred discipline. Every role required total immersion. Every script demanded absolute respect. And every co-star was expected to match the same burning devotion he carried into every frame. That's why throughout his long and extraordinary career, Hackman rarely hated anyone. But when someone violated the principles he lived by, when ego, laziness, or unearned celebrity disrupted the work, his resentment was unforgettable, immovable, and sometimes explosive. Today, we open the doors to a list Hollywood rarely dares to discuss. The 7 actors Gene Hackman clashed with so intensely that they became etched into his private blacklist. Some annoyed him with carelessness, some infuriated him with arrogance, or some challenged him head on, and some despised him before they ever met. Each name carries a real story, raw, unfiltered, and powerful. Stories of rehearsals turned into battlegrounds, scenes charged with barely concealed anger, whispers among crew members who felt the tension ripple through every take. These feuds reveal a hidden truth about Hollywood. Talent alone isn't enough, charm isn't enough, even fame isn't enough. If you stepped onto a set with Gene Hackman, you had to earn your place every single day, and the 7 actors on this list failed that test in a spectacular fashion. Their conflicts with Hackman didn't just expose personal grudges, they drew a line between 2 worlds, one built on discipline, craft, and relentless honesty, and the other shaped by ego, shortcuts, and a star power. This is the story of that divide. This is the story of a man who refused to compromise, and it all begins with the actor who infuriated Hackman on day 1. For Gene Hackman, acting was sacred work, an art that demanded preparation, discipline, and complete immersion. So when he stepped onto the Get Shorty 1995 set and encountered John Travolta, the clash was immediate, unavoidable, and unforgettable. Hackman arrived with the intensity of a seasoned craftsman. He had spent his entire weekend memorizing 8 dense pages of dialogue, breaking down emotional beats, and sharpening every line until it was alive in him. Travolta, meanwhile, walked onto set with nothing but charm. When Hackman asked if he'd prepared the same material, Travolta laughed casually and delivered a line that cut straight into Hackman's core. "You spent your whole weekend on that? What a waste." In that moment, Hackman didn't just see lack of preparation, he saw disrespect for the craft itself. And from there, everything is spiraled. Travolta routinely stumbled through lines, missed cues, and leaned heavily on cue cards that director Barry Sonnenfeld had to hold up just outside the frame. To Hackman, who despised shortcuts and vanity, it was a daily assault on everything he believed an actor should be. Tension simmered so intensely that Hackman often snapped at Sonnenfeld. Not because he was angry with the director, but because he couldn't afford to explode at Travolta. Sonnenfeld eventually confronted him gently. "You're not mad at me, Gene. You're mad at John." Things only worsened. Travolta sometimes arrived late, and once delayed an entire day of shooting because he was busy trying on tuxedos for the Oscars. To Hackman, who rejected Hollywood glamour and lived by steel-hard discipline, this wasn't just unprofessional, it was insulting. The breaking point came during a scene setup. Travolta looked around and asked where they were starting. Hackman pointed straight at the enormous cue card and replied dryly, "Right there, John, top of your cue card." Travolta didn't catch the jab. Hackman didn't care even when Get Shorty became a hit. Even when Travolta won a Golden Globe, Hackman's opinion never softened. Because for Gene Hackman, there was one truth that no award could erase. Travolta was a movie star pretending to be an actor, not an actor doing the work. And for Hackman, that was unforgivable. Of all the clashes in Gene Hackman's life, none was stranger or more painful than the one with John Wayne, a man he never worked with, never met, and yet somehow became one of Hackman's most vocal critics. Long before their paths could ever cross, Wayne had already made up his mind. He despised Gene Hackman. According to Wayne's daughter, Asa, her father would erupt with pure venom every time Hackman appeared on the television screen. No nuance, no explanation, just blunt, sweeping condemnation. "He's the worst actor in town, awful." These weren't critiques of individual performances. They were dismissals of Hackman's entire existence as an actor. Hackman, who believed in emotional truth, meticulous preparation, and disappearing completely into a character, never fought back. But the words struck deeper than he ever admitted publicly. To him, Wayne represented the old guard, a man who relied on myth, persona, and moral simplicity rather than exploring the messy complexity of human behavior. What Wayne saw as masculine authority, Hackman quietly saw as insecurity disguised as judgment. And perhaps Wayne sensed the shift as well, the rising wave of actors like Hackman who were redefining what a screen acting could be. The strangest part? They never shared a film set. They never exchanged a conversation. They never even shook hands. Wayne's hatred came entirely from afar. Hackman responded with silence until silence became the only answer left to give. As the years passed, Hackman's career soared. He won Oscars for The French Connection and Unforgiven, transformed his craft with a daring vulnerability, and became one of the most respected actors of his generation. Wayne, on the other hand, passed away in 1979, long before he could witness Hackman's greatest work. Asa Wayne later admitted her father would likely have changed his mind if he'd lived long enough. But that change never came. No apology, no reconciliation, just a feud suspended in time, one built entirely on one man's bitterness and another man's refusal to engage. In the end, Wayne's disdain didn't slow Hackman down. If anything, it marked the dividing line between the Hollywood of myth and the Hollywood of raw, disciplined craft. Gene Hackman never had to pick a side. He already knew where he belonged. Gene Hackman had worked with giants, but nothing prepared him for the force that walked onto the set of Crimson Tide. Denzel Washington, an actor who didn't just meet Hackman's intensity, he reflected it, amplified it, and pushed it right back at him. From the very first rehearsal, the atmosphere shifted. Hackman entered like a battlefield commander, every line sharpened, every emotional shift meticulously mapped, every moment calibrated with surgical precision. But Denzel arrived with a different kind of fire, instinctive, fluid, unpredictable, and utterly fearless. Hackman saw this looseness as a challenge. Denzel saw Hackman's rigid structure as an invitation. And suddenly, the fictional power struggle between their characters became a real one, an unspoken duel between two heavyweights, neither willing to give an inch. Denzel would later say openly, "I don't think I've ever been intimidated by another actor. This is my arena. Whoever walks in the gym, let's go at it." That was the essence of their clash. This wasn't ego. This wasn't disrespect. This was two masters demanding the best from each other, even if the process nearly tore the set apart. Crew members described rehearsals like sparring rounds, Hackman circling with controlled precision, Denzel striking with instinct and power. Neither man wanted to follow, neither man wanted to yield, neither man allowed the other to dominate the rhythm of a scene. Hackman respected Denzel's immense talent, but he quietly resented the way Denzel kept shifting the power balance, because Hackman believed every scene needed a clear leader, and Denzel refused to let him be that leader alone. Their tension never erupted into open conflict, but it charged every frame of the film with raw electricity. And when production wrapped, something became obvious to everyone. They had created one of the greatest two-man showdowns ever captured on screen. But the experience had drained Hackman completely. They never worked together again. Denzel walked away impressed. Hackman walked away exhausted. And Hollywood walked away, witnessing a rare thing, an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, and realizing both were made of iron. When Gene Hackman signed on to play Lex Luthor in Superman 1978, he approached the role with the same iron discipline that defined his entire career. Every gesture was calculated, every line was rehearsed, every moment was constructed with almost military precision. Then came Margot Kidder. As Lois Lane, Kidder embodied a spontaneity. She was playful, unpredictable, and full of mischievous energy that lit up the seat. But to Hackman, who lived inside his character like a fortress, her looseness felt like a direct assault on his process. From the very first day, their temperaments collided violently. While Kidder cracked jokes between takes, improvised lines, and tried to keep the mood light, Hackman stayed submerged in Lex Luthor's menace, refusing to break character. Crew members recalled hearing him mutter under his breath, "Some of us are trying to make a movie here." To him, her playful interruptions weren't charming, they were sabotage. But Kidder didn't hold back either. She found Hackman's seriousness suffocating, once telling a colleague, "He's so deep into Luthor, he forgets the rest of us are allowed to breathe." That sentence captured everything about their clash. Hackman valued control. Kidder valued freedom. Their scenes together carried a sharp, unspoken tension, not just Lois Lane versus Lex Luthor, but a structure versus a spontaneity, discipline versus creative chaos. Yet beneath the friction, there were moments of reluctant admiration. Hackman privately admitted Kidder had razor-sharp instincts, and Kidder later praised Hackman as a force of nature, one of the greatest actors she ever worked with. But admiration wasn't enough to build friendship. When the Superman films ended, neither of them made an effort to reconnect. No lingering conversations, no shared stories, no warm memories, just a quiet mutual understanding. They were never meant to work in harmony. Their chemistry was combustible, on the screen and off. Of all the clashes in Gene Hackman's career, few cut as deeply or as unexpectedly as his encounter with Richard Harris on the set of Unforgiven. Hackman was not easily shaken. He had endured egos, laziness, outbursts, and unprofessionalism from countless actors. But one thing he valued above almost anything else was respect. for shared experience. So when Richard Harris greeted him on the Unforgiven set, as though they had never met before, Hackman felt something inside him tighten. Because they had worked together before, they'd shared long days, intense scenes, and the kind of creative trench warfare that leaves a permanent mark. For Hackman, forgetting those moments didn't feel like oversight, it felt like dismissal. He muttered to a crew member afterward, "We were in the trenches, and he acts like we've never met." Hackman didn't confront Harris, he didn't complain. He simply stored the slight deep inside and carried it straight into the performance. What happened next became Hollywood legend. During the brutal scene in which Hackman's character, Little Bill, savagely beats Harris's English Bob, witnesses swore the on-screen intensity came from something far more personal. Every swing felt sharper, every glare heavier, every moment loaded with real simmering resentment. Harris himself later joked, "Gene hit like a man who meant it." He even admitted the beating felt like it came with extra seasoning. But behind the humor was a truth neither of them ever acknowledged aloud. Despite working side by side on a modern masterpiece, despite delivering some of the most memorable performances of their careers, they never discussed the tension. No apology, no explanation, no closure. When filming wrapped, Hackman and Harris were polite, but distant, cold, finished. Harris passed away in 2002. Hackman retired soon after, and the only surviving record of their unresolved rift is that unforgettable beating in Unforgiven. A moment of cinematic violence fueled not just by the script, but by a wound Hackman never let heal. Some Hollywood feuds erupt from ego, some from insecurity, but the clash between Gene Hackman and Liza Minnelli came from something deeper. Two completely different worlds forced into the same tiny space. When filming Lucky Lady, 1975, Hackman and Minnelli found themselves trapped together on a cramped boat off the coast of Mexico, battling heat, exhaustion, and each other. Hackman arrived every day razor-focused, his mind locked onto the work, treating the set like sacred ground. Minnelli arrived like a burst of sunlight, chatty, musical, warm, constantly trying to lift the crew's spirits with laughter and song. But what she saw as keeping morale alive, Hackman saw as pure disruption. Burt Reynolds, who co-starred in the film, later recalled how often Hackman snapped at Minnelli, not with mild irritation, but with volcanic sharpness that stunned everyone around them. On bad days, Hackman would bark, "Liza, shut the F up." Crew members sometimes had to walk away until he cooled off. The suffocating heat and relentless isolation of the location only amplified every irritation, every comment, every clash of energy. Minnelli, who was sensitive and wore her emotions openly, often crumbled under Hackman's bluntness. One harsh line from him could wipe the joy from her face for hours. By the time filming finally ended, their partnership was beyond repair. The chemistry on screen felt flat. The reviews were weak, the box office disappointing. Hackman moved on quickly to some of the greatest roles of his career. Minnelli didn't. Her film career stumbled, and she never regained the cinematic momentum she once had. They never reconciled, never shared a warm moment again, never attempted to understand each other. The silence that followed was final, cold, and unmistakable. To Hackman, Minnelli was a distraction, a whirlwind of emotion that shattered the discipline he held sacred. To Minnelli, Hackman was someone who sucked the joy out of creativity. Their feud was not loud, public, or theatrical. It simply ended with two people walking away, turning their backs and never looking back. Gene Hackman was never known for patience, and nothing tested that patience more than working under a young, soft-spoken, pastel-loving filmmaker named Wes Anderson. From the moment Hackman learned he'd be directed by a 32-year-old rising star, the tension was already brewing. He didn't want the role. He didn't like the script. And he especially didn't like the idea of being directed by someone barely old enough to remember his earliest films. Wes Anderson, however, was relentless. He pursued Hackman, pleaded with him, practically stalked him, until Hackman finally, reluctantly, said yes to the Royal Tenenbaums. But when Hackman arrived on set, irritation followed him like a storm cloud. Anderson's filmmaking style, precise, delicate, symmetrical, almost obsessively controlled, could not have been further from Hackman's gritty, instinct-driven, old-school approach. The clash was immediate, unavoidable, legendary. Anderson demanded perfect blocking, frame-specific movement, and exact delivery. Hackman resisted every inch of it, growing tense, sharp, and increasingly volatile. Stories from the set spread quickly. Hackman calling Anderson a siki, snapping, "Pull up your pants and act like a man," and even driving Angelica Houston to tears during a particularly rough day. The atmosphere grew so intense that Bill Murray began visiting the set on his days off, simply to act as a human shield for Anderson, a quiet buffer between the inexperienced director and the relentless storm that was Gene Hackman. Anderson later admitted, with painful honesty, I was probably too young, and it was annoying to him. Hackman wasn't shy about his feelings either. He revealed later that he didn't even fully understand the film while making it. Anderson's whimsical world felt alien, surreal, and suffocating to him. Anderson, on the other hand, saw Hackman as a towering force, unpredictable, demanding, terrifying at times, yet essential to the soul of the movie. But when filming wrapped, Hackman didn't linger. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't offer closure. He simply walked off the set, leaving behind a masterpiece, a shaken young director, and a cast that quietly exhaled once he was gone. It was the last time they ever spoke. Despite all the conflict, The Royal Tenenbaums became one of Hackman's most beloved films, a testament to the strange alchemy that sometimes emerges